Welcome to the World Cultures Pod of Museums Worcestershire. Today's talk is going to be about Aotearoa, land of the long white cloud, New Zealand. We have quite a few objects in this pod, some of which come from New Zealand. We've got a couple out on display on the table I'm going to show you in a minute. But Aotearoa was basically a land full of myths and legends, and it still is today. And one of those fantastic creation myths is about a man called Maui. And Maui is thought to have fished up New Zealand using a hook made from his grandmother's jawbone. So he fished up the North Island, brought it up to the surface, and they used to call that Te Ika a Maui. And the South Island came with it because actually it was called Te Waka a Maui, which ended up being Maui's canoe. And then the Stewart Island, which is just off the coast of New Zealand, was called Te Panga a Maui, Maui's anchor. Please do forgive my pronunciation of Maori. I'm not very good, and I do apologise if I offend anybody with my terrible pronunciation. But the objects that I'd like to show you today are a couple that we have. A quite exceptional example of a pew-pew, which we've got on the table here. It is a skirt, or a garment I should say, made out of New Zealand flax, which is a bush that thrives predominantly in New Zealand and around those areas, Pacific. And what they do is they take a leaf of the flax to make these, and individually what they do is they strip certain sections down to the fibres. So as you can see, if I zoom in on this, there's a fibrous section there. Then you've got the flax as it would have been without being stripped, and then you've got another stripped section. And when they've got a bunch of these, they boil them and dry them. And what that does is that then actually makes the untreated stuff or sections curl up into a little tube. Then what they do when they've actually got a bunch of these, they will dye it in black dye, and the fibrous parts will take on the dye and the untreated parts won't. And then when they've got a sufficient amount, they will actually stitch it to a waistband. We've got a cracking example of this lovely waistband here. It's a mixture of sort of wool and plant fibre, as you can see. These types of garments could at one point be worn over the shoulder, and these days they're actually worn in cultural dances or ceremonial dress. And another item that we've got on display that I wanted to show you that's part of these days a cultural dance is called a poi. We've got one here, and basically they were used traditionally, or historically I should say, as a way of gaining dexterity in your wrist and muscles. For the men who use a particular weapon called a mere, which is like a type of flat club that they used to swing. The women used to strengthen their wrists and muscles with spinning. And these days, on a longer string than this is quite a short string, so on a much longer one these days, one or two poi are actually used in cultural dances, and it's a real skill. What the women do is basically swing it around, and they can change directions and spin it in all sorts of different ways. But they're all in time with each other, so as you can imagine, it must be, they must have to practice quite a lot, I should imagine. Now, at Worcester Museum, Foregate Street Art Gallery, we have got a couple of really good examples of poi in the World Cultures case in Gallery 2. Along with a brilliant example of a Maori cloak. So please do get along to the Worcester Museum and have a look at those in the case. They're in a case with many objects from around the world, and they're wonderful examples of a really rich culture that we have in our collection. So that's the New Zealand, some of the New Zealand objects from Aotearoa.